Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Hope you are well, wherever you are. Let's see who we have with us. So far, it's showing me that there's nobody in the house. There we go. The count has come up to 2 now. Okay. Assalamu alaikum, Iron Man. Good to see you. An intro vertical. ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون. And Assalamu alaikum. I just saw you. Hector. All right. So let me get started pretty quickly today because it could potentially end up being a long presentation. I'll try to move swiftly through it. But I converted a lot of notes that I had into this presentation, so it might have been a bit overboard, but at least I have them, right? Let me make this smaller like this. Assalamu alaikum. Shah Zaib. Thank you, Jazakallah khair. All right, okay. So what am I going to be talking about today? Basically, I mean, if you follow me on Twitter, you've probably seen most of this already. When I was there a few days back, I came across a tweet by Dr. Gabriel Said Reynolds, who is he's very active on social media. He has his YouTube channel called Exploring the Qur'an and the Bible, which has a lot of invaluable information and interviews and presentations on a lot of the academic work that's been going on in the Qur'an. He also has a lot of that on his Twitter. All around fantastic guy as well. Very, very joyful. I love it that he's always smiling when he's talking. But anyway, there was this tweet that they put out, that he put out, which where he was basically showing, comparing or showing the story of Yunus, of Jonah and the whale, right? He was bringing. I had a screenshot of that, I think it was, and he was saying how you would not be able to really understand this passage of the Quran, the story, without already knowing the story beforehand, because the Quran doesn't put the stories in a way which would be comprehensible and understandable to the audience without them having the background knowledge to these stories already, that they would find it confusing and incomprehensible, right? So it's one of the things that they say, that the immediate audience of the Quran, who are the Meccans, must have had prior knowledge to a lot of the stories which are in the Quran, which is why the Quran gives them in such a stripped down version, right? You expect it to already know the stories, and so it just alludes to various points, etc. So that's the idea. And I had a conversation with somebody about that. One of the things that came up was as evidence for the idea that, which you'll see a lot in academia, right? As evidence for the idea that the Meccans already knew the stories of the Quran. What's referenced is a phrase which the Meccans or the opponents of the Quran would say in response to the Quran, that this is nothing but tales or legends of the ancients, right? So I wrote a tweet just about that phrase and how it can't refer to the stories. So I thought, I'd present that today over here as well, together with a few extra thoughts on this. So I've got like about 4 points I want to go through. I don't know if I'll be able to manage them all very quickly. The first one is, of course, just the use of the phrase "legends of the ancients," right? In the Quran, how is it actually used? Next, I want to talk a little bit about the idea of cross-cultural exchange of sacred stories between peoples. I'll talk a little bit about tunnel vision, ivory towers, and academia. And last, just something of a caution with regards to academia in general. For us, not in the way that the sort of the Dawa bros going about it, like they want to gun down academia as this Orientalism and stuff like that. No, but there is a caution that we need to have with regards to that. Anyway, so let's look at this. So does the phrase "Asatir al-Awwalin," which is legends of the ancients, that's how it's usually translated, legends or stories or myths of the ancients, is that said about the Quran with respect to biblical stories? So often the Quran quotes its opponents as dismissing what it says with the rejoinder, these are nothing but tales or myths or legends of the ancients. And an Arabic word is أساطير الأولين. Okay, more literally, it translates to sort of lines, like a satur is a line, okay, a line of writing. Okay, it's also just a normal line, but of course here it probably means line of writing, something that's written down. So written lines of the first or earlier ones, al-awwalin, the first ones, okay? The ancients, basically, the first people, right? From a long time ago. This is just their sort of like writings or their, something that they've written down. From this one phrase, which is repeated a number of times in the Quran, I think many have a very lazy conclusion that it can be brought to bear in favor of the argument that the people of Mecca were already aware of the biblical stories. Okay, now I say it's lazy, and because the phrase is never actually brought up in the context of stories, right, at all. Even a cursory glance would show that. And because it is also seemingly obvious, it's seemingly an obvious service level conclusion, which is why it's lazy, right? When something just seems like an obvious conclusion, and you don't really investigate it, and you just take that conclusion, you're being a bit lazy about it. Okay, you're being a bit lazy about it, right? In the same way that that many who read the Quran, and yes, the translations are replete with saying, الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا means the disbelievers, right? It's still, just a little bit of thought as you're reading the Quran will make you understand that when it says الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, it doesn't mean atheists. What people now think of disbeliever, when people say a disbeliever, they mean atheist, right? Somebody who doesn't believe in the existence of God. That's what disbeliever has come to mean now, right? Obviously, the Quran doesn't mean that, right? But anyway, it's lazy because, again, it's a surface level conclusion can be made that way, right? Because the Quran in its final form has so many biblical stories, right? So the opponent saying this is just nothing but tales of the ancients, it makes sense, right? It's not a stupid conclusion. It's just a bit lazy, right? So what needs to be done, of course, is a survey of the verses. You need to look at them, and I think it reveals very clearly, and we'll do that, later. Reveals very clearly that that's not the case. Okay. Furthermore, the Quran often uses for stories, it will say qasas, right? نحن نقص عليك أحسن القصص. We will narrate to you the best of stories, of retellings, in what we have revealed to you of this Quran, in the story of Yusuf, right? When Musa meets who is likely Shu'aib, when Musa flees Fir'aun and meets, in the desert, he sees those two sisters, and he helps them, and then one of them calls them back. My father wants to reward you for the reward of what you took our flock to water. Musa in the Quran says he narrates the story. فَلَمَّا قَصَّ عَلَيْهِ الْقَصَص, when he narrated to him his story, right? He says, his response is, لَا تَخَافْ نَجَوْتَ مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ, don't worry, you are now safe from the wrongdoing people. So again, the word used is qisas, right? And in another verse, كُلُّ مَا what's the verse exactly? مَا نُثَبِّتْ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ, right? So it's all of these stories of which the Prophet is being told, right? It is in order to make firm his heart, right? To make firm his heart. And again, there, the word used is qasas. It's not asatir, right? It's not asatir. I'm just trying to remember that verse. وَكُلٌّ نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ أَنْبَاءِ الرُّسُلِ, that's it. وَكُلٌّ نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ أَنْبَاءِ الرُّسُلِ مَا نُثَبِّتْ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ وَجَاءَكَ فِي هَذِهِ الْحَقُّ وَمَوْعِظَةٌ وَذِكْرَى لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. That all of these are qisas, are relating, نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ, from the news of the messengers, right, of the past, so the biblical stories, right, so that we can make your heart firm, right? So that's the word which is used throughout the Quran for these things. So why isn't the response, this is nothing but qisas al-awwalin? Why don't they say that? Why don't they say qisas al-awwalin? Instead they say asatir al-awwalin. And the reason, of course, that far from being an admission to knowing or recognizing any of the stories in the Quran, this phrase is just meant to be, and it is certainly portrayed in the Quran as, a callous dismissal, right? When they say, in hada illa asatirul awwalin, this is just asatirul awwalin, they're being dismissive, right? They're being callously dismissive, okay? That is part of the reason why they use this word asatir, okay? The word asatir, from which comes the word ustura. Ustura basically means myth, right? As in something mythical, a legend, which is not history, okay? Something incredulous, something obviously made up, right? This is what an ustura is, right? Just like something that nobody's going to believe, something you tell stories in the campfire, just as entertainment, right? Mythical, fairy tale kind of stuff, okay? More literally, their use of the word asatir conforms with their charge that they bring against the Prophet, that he's crazy, right? He's raving and crazy. Why? Because it links to the idea of scribblings. That's what it really means. Asatirul awwalin. What they're really saying, they're just scribblings of a madman, right? That's how we'd put it, sort of in modern parlance, right? In hadha illa asatirul awwalin. This is just a scribbling of a madman, right? What they would say, this is just the crazy scribblings of people of old, long gone people, right? That's what he's showing, right? And so that is not related to the idea of stories, okay? The rejoinder is just very obviously, it's just a callous polemic dismissal, a rejoinder at the polemic which is aimed at them by the Quran, right? So the Quran is saying something to them, right? And they are just being, and it's polemical, of course, right? And they want to reject it and dismiss it with this phrase. That's all it is, okay? It's pure and simple, that's it. Okay, it's very obvious to see that that's the intent behind that, okay? It isn't an admission that, oh, we know these stories already. Okay, that's clearly not the tone that comes from this, right? It isn't that, we know this. In fact, there's already a verse where we have that, right? Where we have that, where it says, it's not exactly, right, to be honest. It doesn't say that they know these stories. It just says we've heard, right? And if we want, we could have said something similar. What does that mean? If we want, we could have said something similar. We'll come to that verse. But it basically means if we wanted, we could make up this nonsense just like you've made it up, right? You've made up these scribblings, right? We could make it up as well, right? But anyway, the other thing about it, why is it also very obviously just a polemic response, a dismissal? Because it's false, right, and inaccurate, even if we accept that what is meant by it are the stories. Why? Well, because the Quran is not just stories, is it? Right? As it would be if that claim was accepted, right? If they're saying this is only stories or myths of the ancients, right, about the Quran. Well, the Quran is not just stories, right? It's got lots of other aspects. It's got signs of nature. It's got parables. It's got warnings and glad tidings, the threats and the promises, right? It's got moralizing. It's got commands. It's got arguments for the resurrection, arguments for the unity of God, and enjoining to worship God alone, discouraging oppression, encouraging virtue. It's got a lot of these, right? It's not just stories. There's a lot more in the Quran than just stories. So it certainly isn't fair to say this is nothing but legends of the ancients, right? Rather, that's just a polemic dismissal. That's all it is, right? And in any case, even if they were aware of the stories of the previous peoples, right? You've got, for example, Ad and Thamud, the ancient Arab tribes, which these are not part of the biblical stories, right? That's another thing, right? So a lot of the Quran doesn't just have biblical stories; it has a lot of other stories which are not biblical, right? Quite a lot. In fact, I'm not sure if you were to divide up the amount, the biblical stories might come in the minority. They wouldn't come in the majority, right? So you've got Ad and Thamud, you've got their stories as well, right? And the other Arab tribes that were destroyed. The people of Salih, the people of Shu'aib, the people of Hud, right? You've got all of these people, Midian. But the use of Asatir wouldn't work with if they knew these stories and accepted them, right? It wouldn't conform to them knowing the biblical stories or any other stories, right? Because why would they dismiss them in that kind of way? Why would they say these are just scribblings of the ancients, right? Why would they disparage them? Because to them, they would have just been seen as history, right? Just like people, when 1,000 years ago in the Western world, right, they viewed what was written in the Bible as history, right? There were people who tried to calculate the age of the earth from the stories, from the lineages which are in the Bible, right? These were taken as part of history, right? They didn't just think of these as stories, as some academics, for example, would now, right? Academics, which I'll talk about later, they're too much in their heads, right? To them, these are just stories now, right? They think, okay, to these Arabs at the time, no, it wasn't just stories. To them, it was history. They would have no reason to disparage the biblical stories if they knew them, right? Why would they? Okay, so if they knew the biblical stories, or the stories which the Quran recounts, and they knew some of them, of course, they knew the ones probably around something of the ones with respect to Ibrahim, which I'll come to in a minute, then they were those stories were the least problematic aspects of the relation. They were the least disparaging aspect of the revelation. They were the thing that they would dismiss the least, right? They're just the stories, right? And that would be especially true with respect to the story of Ibrahim and Ismail and the Kaaba, which are heavily featured and aimed directly at the Meccans. Would they call those stories as just the crazy scribblings of the ancients? I don't think so. It doesn't fit, right? They wouldn't call it أساطير الأولين, right? The story of Ibrahim, and the story especially it honors them, honored the people of Mecca, that Ibrahim built the Kaaba and Ismail, and they saw themselves as the descendants of Ismail, right? The Quraysh, they clearly knew themselves to be the descendants of Ibrahim through Ismail, right? So they wouldn't disparage these stories in this kind of way, okay? But in any case, like we said, it wasn't the stories that they were dismissing and disparaging, okay? Again, they were the least problematic part of the relation to them. Okay, that isn't what they were dismissing or disparaging. So, okay, coming to the actual verses now. What does a contextual survey of the verses of the phrase, right, which has of the verses which has this phrase, conclude that it is referring to, if not the seemingly first glance surface level obvious to us or to most now conclusion that it's about the stories, right? Well, in short, it's really about the bodily resurrection, God's judgment day, right, and heaven and hell. These were to them the أساطير الأولين. These were the scribblings of a madman, right? These were the things which the Arabs at the time found very, very incredulous, right? The Quran shows heavily that the thing that they had the most trouble with, that the Arabs, the Meccan Arabs, and the other Arabs, the thing that they had the most trouble with was accepting the idea of a bodily resurrection, of a judgment day, of heaven and hell, right? That was the thing which was really difficult for them. Not the stories, not the biblical stories, right? So if they were going to say Asatir al-Awwalin about something, it's not going to be about the biblical stories. It's going to be about that. That is about judgment day and resurrection, and that's exactly what we find, right? Okay, these were the things I've wrote here. These were the things that were incredulous to the Arabs and the most pressing and motivating for change, which they resisted, right? This was one of the things which was pushing them to change the most, warning them of the day of judgment, right? It was the thing that was pressing on them the most, that they need to reform because there's a judgment day, right? And so for them, they were the myths of the ancients, okay, used in polemics against them, which they then attempted to dismiss and disparage with that phrase, okay? And in fact, one could argue that the whole issue of kufr and iman in the Quran, right? If you want to take it to actually mean belief and disbelief, right? That now again, I don't think it's accurate to think of it that way, but that you could say that it's centered around the issue of the hereafter. Okay, not God's greatness or unity, not about His existence, and most certainly and definitely not about the biblical stories. Okay, they were not the issue for the Arabs. Judgment Day was. Okay, so now I've put the verses more like in a screenshot from my phone. I don't know if this is going to be better than the way I usually have it, if it's clearer to see or not. But here's the first verse, okay? Very obvious one. And the phrase Asatir al-Awwalin doesn't come up that much in the Quran. I think it's just in 7 verses or 9, something like that. Anyway, I've got them all here. This is one of the verses which shows clearly what it is. It's in Surah 46. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم والذي قال لوالديه أف لكما أتعدانني أن أخرج وقد خلت القرون من قبلي وهما يستغيثان الله ويلك آمن إن وعد الله حق فيقول ما هذا إلا أساطير الأولين. But the one who says to his parents, Uff to you, do you promise me that I will be brought forth from the earth when generations before me have already passed on, into oblivion, while they call to Allah for help and to their son? Woe to you, believe, indeed the promise of Allah is true. But he says, this is not but legends of the former peoples. Here, what does legends of the former peoples mean? Does it mean the stories of the former people? No, it means this claim that he's going to be resurrected, right? Which is why, saying legends of the former doesn't work. Legends of the former people or myths of the former people or stories of the former, it doesn't work in this verse, right? What it really is scribblings, This is just what would really work is this is nothing but scribblings of madmen, right? What you, my parents, have ingested and you're trying to convince me. This is just nothing but the scribblings of madmen long gone, right? That's the sense of how it's coming up, right? It's just crazy talk, right? Scribblings, that's all it is, right? Next verse, very clear as well. بل قالوا مثل ما قال الأولون. Rather they say, like in response to what the Quran says, they say like what the former people said. قالوا وإذا متنا وكنا ترابا وعظاما إِنَّا لَمُبْعَثُونَ. They say, when we have died and become dust and bones, are we indeed to be resurrected? لقد وعدنا نحن وآباؤنا هذا من قبل إن هذا إلا أساطير الأولين. We have been promised this promise, we've been promised this, we and our forefathers before us, right? This is not but legends of the former peoples. Again, legends of the former people. That doesn't work, right? When you talk about legend, it's something about the past, right? It's not a legend, right? When they say this is only أساطير الأولين, they mean this is just like the promises or the fables or the predictions of madmen, of people, their scribblings. This is what's going to happen in the future. You're going to be resurrected, and you're going to. And it's just scribblings of mad people. That's what they mean. Okay, they don't mean the stories of, biblical stories or any other stories, right? Another verse very similar to it. وقال الذين كفروا أئذا كنا ترابا وآباؤنا أئنا لمخرجون. And those who are ingrates, الذين كفروا, say, what, when we have become dust as well as our forefathers, will we indeed be brought out of the graves, right? And الذين كفروا, again, disbeliever doesn't work here, right? They weren't disbelievers. These were believers in God. But ingrates works, right? To be ungrateful, that you'll be resurrected. To be resurrected is a good thing, right? That your life is not just going to end in oblivion. You will be resurrected, okay? And so it's like a promise, right? It's not in the Quran. There's two. There's wa'd and there's wa'id, right? Wa'd means a promise, which is good. Wa'id is like a threat. Okay, so here they are sort of seeing it almost as a good thing, but they're not believing it. So the next verse says, لَقَدْ وَعِدْنَا. We were promised that. This seems like a good promise, but we were promised it. We were promised هذا. لَقَدْ وَعِدْنَا هَذَا نَحْنُ وَآبَاؤُنَا. We were promised this, us and our forefathers before. This is just nothing but scribblings of the ancients. It's nothing but أساطير الأولين. Right. So again, it's not referring to anything other than the resurrection, the bodily resurrection. Okay. Here's another one. الذين يكذبون بيوم الدين. It's one of the earliest surahs as well, right? A very early surah. And now, that's important because the stories were not in the Quran. A lot of the stories were not in the Quran yet, right? So of course it can't be referring to the stories, right? I mean, it's not as early surah as the next one, which I will show. But here it says, الذين يكذبون بيوم الدين وما يكذب به إلا كل معتد أثيم. He who denies the day of resurrection, the day of recompense, right, the day of death, and none denied it except every sinful transgressor, right? And then it says, when our verses are recited to him, when our signs are recited to him, signs about what? Signs about the day of judgment, right? Signs about the day of judgment. When they are recited to him, he says, this is nothing but asatirul awwalin. There's nothing but scribblings of the ancients, right? Scribblings of the former peoples, right? Yeah, so this verse here is one of the earlier surahs in Surah Noon. Maybe, some say it's the second surah revealed or the third, very, very early. And again, we have the example here where before this, it's actually speaking about a certain one individual. Okay, he's not named. In the Sirah literature, they say it's Al-Mughira, or Al-Walid ibn Mughira, or Al-Mughira ibn Walid, I forget which way around. إذا تتلى عليه آياتنا قال أساطير الأولين. Right, that when our signs are recited to him, he says there's nothing but أساطير الأولين. Now, this can't refer to the stories if we accept that this is a very early surah, because again, no stories were shown. And on top of that, it's only after this comes this verse that we actually have a story in the surah, right? So from verse 17, we actually have a story in the surah there, the story of the garden and stuff. Just give me a second, please. 1 second. All right, okay. Everybody can still hear me fine, right? Okay, let's move on to the next verse. Okay, the next two verses actually. So these two verses are very interesting. Okay, it's basically shows the response. They juxtapose the response to what God has revealed by the people of Taqwa, right? And by the people of the opponents, okay, the kuffar in this case, right? So it juxtaposes their responses when it said to them, "What has your Lord revealed?" When it says to them, "What?" When anybody asks them, "What has your Lord revealed?" So the good people, the faithful, the muttaqeen, they don't answer true stories, right? They don't answer true stories, right? While the kuffar say أساطير الأولين, okay? Now these things are juxtaposed, right? So what is the goodness which the people of faith say has been revealed? Well, it's mentioned in the verse itself, right? What do they mean by goodness? They mean what they actually say afterwards, which that whoever does goodness in this world will receive goodness in the next. Okay, and that's what their Lord has revealed, right? Whoever has done goodness in this world will receive goodness in the next, which is again another indication, as we see all over the Quran, that Jannah and salvation is by actions, by goodness, not by beliefs. Okay. Now the ingrates, what do they say? Okay, they are ungrateful to that bounty from God, right? That the one who does good will receive good. Okay, and they claim that that's nothing but scribblings, but scribblings of the ancients, promises of the ancients, right? People a long time ago they promised this, and it's all just nonsense, right? Myths and stories about the future, that you're going to go into Jannah and you're going to have palaces and you're going to have rivers underneath your gardens underneath which rivers flow. You're going to eat all these fruits. You're going to have whatever you want. There's going to be maidens there. There's going to be, rivers of milk, of wine, of pure water. All of these are just scribblings of the ancients to them. أساطير الأولين. That's what it means. It's all nonsense. They say no one is getting resurrected for judgment. So do what you want, right? And so that has consequences, right? And we'll see that in a minute, right? So let's look at the verses first. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ مَاذَا أَنزَلَ رَبُّكُمْ قَالُوا أَسَاطِيرُ الْأَوَّلِينَ. And when it is said to them, what has your Lord sent down? They say, legends, scribblings of the ancients, right? Now, of course, like we said before, that's the Quran does not just have stories, right? It has a lot more than that. But again, this is them being dismissive, right? Dismissive, and so even when of course what it meant here again, Judgment Day and the bodily resurrection, the Quran doesn't just have that. Okay, so in fact they are when they're dismissing the resurrection with asatirul awwalin, or they're dismissing the revelation as just asatirul awwalin, is nothing but it's just the whole revelation is just speaking about Judgment Day. They're basically saying, right? So it's actually the opposite of what a lot in academia would. If the conclusions of some in academia about this phrase was right, that they say the Quran is nothing but stories of the ancients, then they're basically saying that the whole of the Quran is nothing but stories of the ancients, which isn't true. When in fact, right, what they're actually saying is this whole Quran is nothing but scribblings about Day of Judgment, okay, which is not true, right? So in fact, if you were to take this properly by the meaning of Asatir al-Awwalin, they are actually denying the stories in the Quran, right? They're saying the Quran doesn't have stories of the biblical stories. It doesn't have signs of nature. It doesn't have this. It doesn't have anything else except scribblings about the Day of Judgment, right? Anyway, the verse afterwards says لِيَحْمِلُوا أَوْزَارُهُمْ كَامِلَةً يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ, so that they may carry their own burdens fully on the Day of Judgment. وَمِنْ أَوْزَارِ الَّذِينَ يُضِلُّونَهُمْ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ, and of the burdens of those whom they misguide without any knowledge, right? أَلَا سَاءَ مَا يَزِرُونَ, how evil is that which they carry. Why is that? Because they led others to deny Judgment Day as well, which led these others to then, feel freer to not do good and to do evil, right? So they misguided them in that kind of way, right? It isn't that they misguide people into not accepting the biblical stories or any other stories, right? That isn't something which you have to accept, right, to be rewarded on the Day of Judgment. You don't have to accept biblical stories, right? And then later down, so this is the last verse here is verse 25, and the sort of continues, and you get to verse 29. فَادْخُلُوا أَبْوَابَ جَهَنَّمَ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا فَبِئْسَ مَثْوَى الْمُتَكَبِّرِينَ, right? So enter the gates of hell to abide therein forever, and how wretched is the residence of the arrogant. The people who will be in hell are the arrogant, right? And then here we have the juxtaposed response of the people of Taqwa. وَقِيلَ لِلَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا مَاذَا أَنزَلَ رَبُّكُمْ, and it said to the people of Taqwa, what has your Lord revealed? They say goodness. That, and the next part is part of what they say, right? What has your Lord revealed? Goodness, right? The people of Kufr call it أساطير الأولين. Day of Judgment is أساطير الأولين, scribblings of the ancients. The people of Taqwa see the Day of Judgment as something good. Why? Because لِلَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا فِي هَذِهِ الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً, because to those who do good in this dunya will be goodness, right? وَلَدَّارُ الْآخِرَةِ خَيْرٌ, and also because the abode of the next world is better. وَلَنِعْمَ دَارَ الْمُتَّقِينَ, and how wonderful is the abode of the people of Taqwa, right? That they see that as a good thing. The people of Taqwa see that that is a very, very good thing, that on the Day of Judgment, that those who do good in this world will receive goodness, right? They say, what has your Lord revealed? Goodness, right? This is a very good thing, okay? And so again, I wrote here about the others, and thus they misguide others, and they will thus carry on Judgment Day their own burdens, as well as of the burdens of those whom they misguide without knowledge. Denying the biblical stories is not something for which anyone will carry sins. Okay, so you can read that again, but I'm not going to. Right? If you want, I just put it here just to emphasize it. So here we have another example. فَإِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُنَا قَالُوا قَدْ سِمِعْنَا, right? And when our verses are recited to them, they say, we have heard. If we willed, we could say something like this. What does that mean? Okay, this is not but the scribblings of the ancients. It means we could have made up all this stuff too. We could make up, stories about what you would get in Day of Judgment. In fact, they did, right? If you accepted that these are people of Mecca, right, and the first generation of Muslims who later became Muslim, right, and a lot of them invented a lot of narrations and hadiths. They did make up a lot of this, right, and they made up a lot of hadiths about Judgment Day and what would happen then, and this is going to happen, and this is أساطير الأولين, that's what it is, right? But in that case, it really is, right? They're just making up things. قد سمعنا, we've heard, and if we wanted, we could say something like it. And I would argue they eventually did say something, perverse, not exactly like it, but to them it might have seemed like it, right? And then, of course, you can see from the context that, again, it is all about Judgment Day. So the next verse is, وَإِذْ قَالُوا اللَّهُمَّ إِنْ كَانَ هَذَا هُوَ الْحَقُّ مِنْ عِنْدِكَ, shows again that they are believers in God, right? They say, oh Allah, if this is the truth from you, what is this? This is what they denounced earlier as, in the previous verse, as أساطير الأولين, which is Judgment Day, right? But they say, no, if there really is a Judgment Day, right, in the arrogance, then punish us now. That's what this next verse says, right? Oh Allah, if this Judgment Day is really the truth from you, then send down upon us now rocks from the sky, or bring us a huge punishment now. So this is just part of their arrogance, right? In seeing that in denouncing Judgment Day even more, right? It's not just the أساطير الأولين. If it's true, bring it on now, right? That's basically what they're saying. If it's true, oh Allah, bring it on now, right? In their arrogance. And another verse, I think this is the last one. Okay. ومنهم من يستمع إليك وجعلنا على قلوبهم أكنة أن يفقهوه وفي آذانهم وقرا ومن يروا كل آية لا يؤمن بها حتى إذا جاءوك يجادلونك يقول الذين كفروا إن هذا إلا أساطير الأولين. For this one, you would have to read the context, the verses before and after, to be able to see that again. It is about judgment. It's certainly not about any stories, right? There's no narrative about stories which has been denied and called أساطير الأولين in this. But let me read the translation here. And among them are those who listen to you, to Muhammad, right? But we have placed over their hearts coverings lest they understand it, and in their ears deafness. And if they should see every sign, they would not believe in it, right? Have faith in it, okay? Even when they come to you, arguing with you, those who disbelieve, the ingrates, الذين كفروا, say, this is nothing but legends of the former peoples. What were they arguing about? What were they arguing about? يجادلونك. Are they arguing about the biblical stories? Is that what they're doing? They say, no, you're telling the stories wrong? Is that what they... No. They're arguing with the Prophet about Judgment Day, right? They argue with the Prophet about Judgment Day, and they say, in هذا إلا أساطير الأولين. This is just the scribblings of the former people. It's nonsense, right? The ravings of the old people. All right, okay, so that was a long part, and now I just want to finish up as quickly as I can. First one, I just want to mention just something. Maybe I'll try to be quick so you can take these ideas yourselves and think on it a little bit more. So one of the issues that so again, what started off this, why I wrote that thread and why I'm talking about this now is just again the idea in academia where they say that the people in Mecca, they knew all of these stories already. Otherwise, they would not have understood what the Qur'an is talking about, because the Qur'an doesn't give them all in so much details, right? So one issue of that, of course, is or one idea that's floated around is that there was this intellectual milieu, right, in Arabia. They had all of this knowledge just sloshing around. People knew it, right? But I contest that. I contest that very, very strongly, because I don't think most peoples, even when they live in close proximity to each other, when you have people of different cultures, right, and different religions, even when they are in close proximity with each other, they don't freely share their religious stories, their sacred history, right, their cultural stories. They don't just freely share them, right? People don't just know about them just because they live there, right? So academia does say, oh, well, there were some Jews and Christians around in Arabia, therefore these stories must have been current in Mecca. That's a huge leap. That is a very, very huge leap. Okay, how do you know they were current in Mecca? Okay, the circular reason, of course, of course, when it comes to academia, they're looking at things in a secular way, right? So, of course, they have to say that it has to have come from somewhere, right? But even now, right, in the modern world, right, let alone the past, right, now in the modern world where countries go to great lengths to have people become, everybody wants it to become educated and integrated, right, culturally aware of the other, where our kids go to the same schools, right, where we learn religious education. How well do people know the faiths and religious stories of the other? Not very well at all, right? Not very well at all. There have been Muslims in the West for how long now? And there are still people that don't know that Muslims believe, well, maybe now, because Muslims are in the global scene, right? Because of politics and stuff. But they were like, people get absolutely dumbstruck, right? Pre-internet days especially, the Muslims believed that Jesus was the Messiah. What? You guys believe that Jesus is the Messiah too? Right? Why? Why? After Islam has been around for 1,400 years, right? And there's been a lot of movement and people, immigrants live in and all of this, and they don't know, right? Until recently, well, not recently, but if you look at some old Hollywood movies, right, you find the ones which are set in like Sinbad the Sailor kind of the movies. You find them showing, depicting Muslims praying in the most bizarre way, right? This was at a time where people could travel, to Turkey. They went around, right? they could easily see how Muslims pray, but they have things like, somebody standing at the top on the minaret saying Allahu Akbar, and people just in the street just doing straightaway sujood, no ruku or anything, right? Every major city has a Chinatown. Does that mean everybody in that major city knows the Chinese, Chinese calendar or Chinese stories, or some of the great folklore of Chinese history, or anything about religion? No, we don't know that. I lived, I grew up in, I went to a school where there was a lot of, well, not a lot, but there were Hindus, right? People who knew nothing about Krishna. I still don't know anything about Krishna or the Hindu religion. I know almost nothing about that, right? And this is even after like googling and googling every once in a while just to see, okay, what is it about? You forget about it afterwards, right? People just did not. There wasn't this idea of an intellectual milieu, right? And at the time, especially back then, the sacred stories, the sacred scripts, the actual texts were kept by the priests and learned people of that community, and they were kept under lock and key. Okay, they were not bringing them out to show Arabs. The Jews were not bringing out their scriptures to show the Arabs or telling them their stories. They weren't doing that, right? You didn't have that, I don't think, right? So this idea of there being an intellectual milieu and that people were just sharing each other's stories and you could just travel around, and that anybody born at the time would just know about it. No, where's that leap coming from? Right? I don't accept it, right? Because even now, it's not the case. People just don't know all of their even their own sacred stories. I mean, when you see those videos of in the streets of America, where people just ask, people in America just, not kids, but college students, they ask them things about basic history or religion or geography, and they're like clueless, right? Very weird. But maybe that's just an American thing. Right? I'm not sure. And of course, I don't think it's all over America, but it's always fascinating, right? That. Anyway, let's move on. So to remind of, so another thing, talking about just this tunnel vision and this, this ivory tower mentality that some academics have, right? So they sit in the ivory tower and they start to think about, how the people in Mecca in the 7th century, they couldn't have understood these stories without knowing the background. So they must have known the background. Such huge leaps, right? Such huge leaps, okay? To the mind of an academic, we know, with a different cultural background and a different sense of storytelling, and also from a different culture living over a millennium later, it may seem that those stories should have been incoherent or incomprehensible to the immediate audience if they didn't know, if they didn't have the background information, right? But that's just the bias, I think, of the intellectual, right? How do you know, right? I think the Arabs were very used to the type of storytelling which is in the Quran, right? If you read the epic poems, right, they involve stories, and a lot of it is just allusions. They don't mention explicitly, a lot of the things, right? It's normal, right? And to them, it wouldn't have been a big problem to follow these stories. Okay, excuse me. So this is where I think academics are in danger of being too much in their own heads, so to speak, right? Especially when you spend time just with academics all the time, and academics only speak about the Quran or other academics, etc. They forget that the Quran has a reality on the ground of the people who are not in the ivory towers of academia. Okay, so look at it this way: there are Quranic stories now, all right, like the people of the trenches, or Dhul Qarnayn himself, right, that are completely unknown to a current Christian background audience, right? Yet those stories and those narratives from the Quran, just as they are, right, in and of themselves, are they confusing? Are they confusing to people in Canada? No. Are they confusing to people in Japan? No, right? They're not confusing. Okay, they're not incoherent. They have some things which you, as an academic, think, oh my God, there's so much missing in the story, because you know the biblical story, right? But somebody who doesn't know the original stories and is just listening to the story, it's not incomprehensible, it's not confusing, okay? And certainly not for the import and the purpose of those stories, okay? I wrote here, people on the streets will understand and not be confused by those stories at all, right? And they certainly wouldn't see them as incoherent for not knowing the full detailed originals, right? Even if the academic might bristle with 100 questions about them, right? So if you take, for example, Surah Al-Buruj, right, Surah 85, to anyone, Christian or not, they will understand it just fine. They will understand what the purpose of the story is, right? That it's about, the persecution of the faithful and those who persecute people of faith for no other reason than they have faith in God, and then they will be punished, right? It's not incomprehensible. It's not. You don't need to know the background story for that, right? It just won't be confusing or incoherent or anything like that to the extent that you must read up on the background or culture or have or see an academic paper in order to understand it. Okay. So too much time spent in the ivory tower of academia talking about the audience of the Quran with others up there, forgetting that even now the Quran has an audience on the streets, from America to Brazil to Japan. Do they find its stories incoherent or confusing for the lack of background knowledge? No. And more importantly, are they in any way confused about the clear intent of narrating these stories? No. Okay. So for the latter, I would say definitely no. But for the former, I would you could see people being finding the style of the Quran jarring or disconcerting if they aren't culturally used to any similar style of storytelling, right? So there are people, of course, who read the Quran and they find it very jarring, right? They're like, well, the story, the Quran, goes through a story. You don't get all of the juicy details, and then quickly goes on to another story, and it's stripped down so much, and they might find that jarring, right? They might find that jarring, but that doesn't mean they find it confusing, right? They just might not be used to that kind of storytelling. Conversely, of course, some of the stories in the Quran, because they deviate from the biblical narratives, they might confuse those who already know it, right? So give the section of Jesus talking, in the cradle or not being crucified to a Christian, right? And they will actually find that it will create confusion, right? It's not that they needed to know the original stories, right? So what the author of the Quran knows is one thing, and assuming that what it knows and references is common knowledge to all the audience is another thing entirely, right? The last thing I want to mention is just a brief caution, something of a caution at least, regarding academia, right? So we have to be careful that the academic papers and the peer-reviewed papers, they don't take the place of tafsir. They don't become the new tafsir books, right? So beware of letting it become a replacement for traditional tafsirs, where you will only accept what the Quran says, what God says, if it is confirmed by a peer-reviewed paper published in a reputable journal, right? I'm just saying that because I'm getting an inkling that you start to see that a little bit, right? Now, with academics and academia, they will work at their own pace, right? And they'll work from their own secular presumptions. Okay, so something like this, however obvious it is, however obvious that Asatir al-Awwalin, it definitely does not mean the stories of the previous peoples or the biblical. It doesn't mean that at all. Okay, it will not become part of the field. It will not become accepted, right? Until enough papers have been published, right? Until enough peer-reviewed papers have been published and on it, and enough other academics take it up, it's just not going to become part of the field, right? You could show this now to an academic work in it, right? Somebody who's not researching the issue, right? And they will be non-committed, right? No matter how obvious it is, they're pretty much going to be. I'm guessing here, maybe I'm projecting myself, but they'll be non-committed, right? They'll say, okay, yeah, that's a good point, but they're not going to say, oh no, that's definitely right, right? They're going to be non-committed if they're not working on the issue themselves, and they will say, I will see what somebody who works on this will say, right? Somebody who actually does publishes something on it, and they will go along with that, right? So don't expect, we shouldn't expect academia to move quickly beyond how it's set up. Okay, academics are looking at the Quran as an important document of world history. Okay, so their conclusion, insights, and tools are definitely incredibly useful and important. I follow a lot of academics myself, and I think their work is just amazing, right? A lot of their work is fantastic. But just always keep in mind that for us, the Quran is in the end revelation from God, right? It's meant for guidance. And that doesn't mean waiting for the academia to tell you what that guidance is, right? I've mentioned before, لَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ, that Allah has made the Quran easy to be a reminder for remembrance. So is there anybody who will take admonition, reminder, remembrance, guidance from it? Okay, and so in the past, people have locked up their hearts behind tafsir, right? They lock up their own hearts by tafsir, right? They will only accept the verse means something if a tafsir says it, right? If somebody in the past, a mufassir, heavyweight of the past, said it. Otherwise, no, they're not willing to just take guidance from the Quran, right? And to say what they think it clearly is saying, to let themselves ponder it themselves. Okay, so we have to be wary that there's a danger. I think it could be coming up. The more the more academia picks up steam with the Quran, the more it becomes more widely known. That there's a danger of people just basically replacing tafsirs now with peer-reviewed academic papers, which be a step forward in the end, right? But still, it isn't what we should be aiming for. All right, that's the end of that. Wow, that was almost an hour long. All right, so I don't have anybody backstage. Let me have a look quickly. If you have something that you were asking or something you want me to elaborate on, just put it in the chat now. Copy it again in the chat or write it now. I'll scroll up and see if there's anything I need to address. But that's the end of the presentation. Okay. Let's see. Going all the way back to Iron Man. Hope you're well. So atheists are not mentioned. Oh yeah, I've mentioned this before. I don't think atheists are mentioned in the Quran at all. There's very few people. I think there's only one example of somebody who doesn't believe in God in the Quran, and that's Fir'aun, right? And he's sort of agnostic, right? He's saying, Haman, build me a thing so I can go up and see and look at the God of Musa. But I think he's a liar, There's no God up there, And he's saying, I do not know any other God for you, to the people of Egypt. I don't know any other God apart from me, right? He says, Ana rabbukum al-a'la, I am your Lord Most High, right? And he's the only example that I can clearly point to of an atheist in the Quran, right? Other than that, no. الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, they're all believers in God at the time. Remember, atheism is something very, very new, right? On the world stage, very, very new. Time of the Quran, everybody believed in the existence of God, and the Quran reiterates that time and time again. If you ask them who created the heavens and the earth, they will say Allah, right? Yeah, there we go. Well, I didn't even know the Christians called Jesus as fully God until 3 years ago. Yeah, that's what I mean. You see, this idea, and we are consider ourselves educated. We're educated in schools together with other Christians. You might live in a Western country, but it's not. There's no intellectual milieu like there is now. There definitely wasn't one like that in the 7th century Arabia and Mecca, right? even in Medina. Again, the academia has this idea that the Arabs of Medina knew all the stories that the Jews of Medina knew, and I highly, highly doubt that, right? That they would just sit down together and, hey, tell us your stories. Jews of Medina, like, oh yeah, sure, well, we'll tell you our stories, our most sacred stories and stuff. Yeah, we'll share them with you. It wasn't like that. There wasn't like a public library where they could loan each other's books, right? Even borrow books of the other culture and read about them, or they would swap scriptures to read them. It wasn't like that. You just don't see that at all. So I definitely don't like that. What was this? Sorry, Kukish. I don't know which message that was. Message here in the chat, you mean? Or do you mean on YouTube comments? Some of some of the messages, I don't know if anybody's experienced this, but a lot of the times, not a lot of the times, but it happens every once in a while where a comment just doesn't show up. I've had that happen to me on other channels or on other places where I've tried to put a comment on other videos, not my channel, of course, but on other channels. You put a comment and it just disappears, right? Just letting you know, I don't delete any comments on this channel. I haven't deleted any comments at all. I don't think I've ever deleted a single one. I haven't banned anybody either. I think there was one person actually I banned a while ago. Somebody was being really obnoxious. One or two people, but definitely not more than that. And I haven't deleted any comments. Is Jethro Shuaib? I think so, as far as I know, Jethro. But should be noted, I haven't studied the Bible. I haven't read it. Okay, so I don't know. I mean, I've got plenty to read and ponder about in the Quran, but I know very little about the Bible. Right? I would like to read the New Testament. I tried reading the Old Testament. But it was just so all over the place. The depiction of God in it was really, really weird from what I'm used to. So I never finished. I tried reading, from the beginning of Genesis and stuff, but that stopped. I think I've read, like, skimmed the Gospels, or I've read one of the Gospels fully. I don't know, but I haven't read the Bible or studied it myself. How is Fir'aun agnostic? He is definitely an atheist with a hot head. Yeah, I mean, I was just saying that from that one verse where he says to Haman, build me, basically build me a ladder, let's say, right, so that I can go up and check, so I can go up and see or look upon the God of Musa, and I think that he is crazy, he is lying, that there is no God up there. So you could take that and say, hey, he's agnostic, right? And then when he says, right, all people of Mr. I don't know of any other God for you. I don't know of any other God for you except me, right? Again, you don't need, that doesn't have to be an exact denial that God exists. You just say, okay, I don't know of any other God for you except me. I am your God, right? Is that a denial of God altogether? And he's saying, I don't know of any. So you could take it that way, but you could just say he's an atheist. Like I said, I mean, the only example of an atheist in the Quran I would point to, if I had to point to one, it would be Fir'aun. Do you know that one of Adam's sons is going to hell because he killed his brother? Yeah, I do know that. Yeah. Not only that, I mean, anybody who kills anybody who is safe deliberately, it's a one way ticket to hell. People talk about shirk being the unforgivable sin. Yes, it is unforgivable, but as I've said before, committing an act of shirk will always be on the scales on the day of judgment, but you can balance that out with another good deed, right? Person commits a shirk, it isn't a one-way ticket to hell, right? Even if they die upon that shirk, right? It's not a one-way ticket to hell. But to murder somebody who is enjoying safety, right? Somebody who's safe, right? To murder somebody like that, that's a one-way ticket to hell, right? And there is no repentance from that. Okay, there's no repentance from deliberate murder, cold-blooded murder, basically. The Quran is quite clear about eternal hell. Well, I mean, you could say I've talked about it being eternal hell. If you want to think of it this way, eternal hell, but finite punishment. Right? Eternal hell, but finite punishment. But in the end, I personally don't think there's nothing which is quote unquote eternal, right? If there's going to be one thing which is eternal, it's God, right? Hell is not eternal. God is eternal. You could think of it that way. But time is in the end, it's creation, right? So when you say something is eternal, time itself will come to an end, right? If time itself comes to an end and something has existed until the end of that time, could you say it's eternal that way? I suppose you could. In the end, I think that the word khalidina fiha, right? It's the closest we can understand that to mean now is timelessness, right? So rather than hell being eternal, I would say hell and heaven both are timeless, right? Timeless rather than eternal. But I have a stream on that and a presentation on that if you want to check it out. I forget which number it is. If you just look in the live tab, you should be able to see it's the one with the thumbnail where you can see a hourglass and the eternity sign, right? Yeah, they could have done. I mean, again, I don't know about the Jewish religion very well, but one of the things that people have mentioned before is that there doesn't seem to be much about hell, right, or anything about hell in the Old Testament, right? So one of the arguments against Islam and the Deen and things like this is the progression, right? That you can see there's a progression in talk about hell from Judaism to early Christianity to later Christianity to Islam, right? Where you have in the Quran you have a lot of talk about heaven and hell, whereas before that there wasn't this idea as much. So this is just how things developed, right? In the Quran itself, it does hint that the Jews covered up because they thought that we're never going to go to hell, right? So they got rid of that concept completely from their scriptures. It could be that as well, but again, I don't know enough about them. Can't really comment on that. Denying hell, it's not bad. I mean, nobody's going to go to hell for denying hell, right? It's like a circular kind of argument, right? In the end, the Quran is clear. I mean, I've said this many times. The Quran is clear that people will be judged for their deeds, for their actions, and that's why God created life and death to see which of us is best in actions. People enter Jannah and enter hell bima kuntum ta'malun, by what you used to do, right? The issue of denying judgment, right, is why would you deny a judgment day? Who's the type of person who wants to deny the judgment day? The good person or the bad person? The bad person, of course, right? 22 50 says that most of mankind is in kufr. Yeah, well, most of mankind isn't very grateful, is it? No. ولقد حق عليهم إبليس ظنه. I think, is that the right verse you're asking about? Let me see, 2550. All right, 2550, that's Surah Al-Furqan, right? Which verse is that? فَأَبَى أَكْثَرُ النَّاسِ إِلَّا كُفُورًا. Yeah, I mean, look, the nas here, the people here, right? وَلَقَدْ صَرَّفْنَاهُ بَيْنَهُمْ لِيَذَّكَّرُوا فَأَبَى أَكْثَرُ النَّاسِ إِلَّا كُفُورًا, right? So when it says, we have, indeed, turned it about among them, right? So that they may remember, yet most of men, of the nas, of those people, right, that to whom what was said was being turned about, right? So it's talking about the people, it's talking about whatever was, how can I put this, because it's not very clear to put it in English. Let me see what's the previous verse. Okay, yeah. So the previous verses, what is it about? It's about again one of the signs of the signs of God, right, in nature, right, which is supposed to be signs also for the resurrection, but it's mostly here it's signs of nature and also just favors that God has done, right? So if you look at the previous verses, the verse where I will start at least, وهو الذي أرسل الرياح بشرا بين يدي رحمته وأنزلنا من السماء ماء طهورا. And it's He who has loosened the winds, bearing good things, good tidings before His mercy, and we sent down from heaven pure water. Okay, so what is it? What are these verses talking about? They're talking about the blessings of God towards mankind, right? لنوحي به بلدة ميتة, so we may bring with it to life a dead earth, ونسقيه مما خلقنا وأنعاما وأناسيا كثيرا, and that we can give, and fruit we give drink to of it to what we have created, and to cattle and many among men, right? وَلَقَدْ صَرَّفْنَاهُ بَيْنَهُمْ, and so we have indeed turned it about among them. What is that? It's talking about the rain and these blessings, and yet most of mankind are in what? Kufura. What does that mean? Ingratitude. You even have this in some of the translations, like here I can see Pixel has ingratitude, which is the correct thing, right? Kufur, its primary meaning is ingratitude. Again, we've said this a lot on this channel, right? So what it's talking about here is that most people are ungrateful, not disbelievers in this case, right? Jews believe in Judgment Day per Isaiah, just they interpret eternal al-alma in Hebrew as finite closure, so it's similar to Khalid's statement just now. Okay, yeah. I mean, that's rejected in the Quran as well. For example, so they say in the Quran, they say لن تمسنا النار إلا أياما معدودات, right? That the Jews say the fire will not touch us except for a pointed number of days, right? And the Quran rejects that, right? Rejects that. I also, of course, reject that. I don't think that it's going to be just a finite number of days and then you're out, right? I don't think anybody who goes to hell will leave hell, right? Nobody who goes to hell will ever be out, right? That's basically what they're saying. They're saying the hell will touch us for a few days and then we'll be out, right? And then we're out and no, right? So the Quran rejects that and says that they will be in there khalidina fiha. They will be in there for eternity, right? Or in what I would say forever, but it's timelessness, right? It's not like there's no cumulative punishment in hell, right? There's no cumulative punishment forever. There will become, infinite punishment, right? That's what I would say about that. Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know if it was covered up or not because I don't know the scriptures. But I know, for example, who was killed? Was it Zechariah who was killed or Yahya? I'm not sure. John the Baptist, but certainly in the Islamic literature, they have in narrations, they have that certain prophets were killed, right? So are there examples in the Bible where prophets were killed? Well, I don't think they would keep them in the Bible, right? Those stories, they wouldn't be in the Bible. They would not want to have those kept there. But the Quran definitely confirms that yes, a number of prophets and messengers were killed, right? This is very odd emojis. Those like eyes and teeth. I don't know. But people who have kufr, ingratitude, go to hell. Yeah, kufr takes you to hell, without that. But you have to understand again what kufr is, right? Just like shukr, right? It's opposite, which is gratitude. It doesn't mean just saying, "Oh Allah, thank you, thank you, thank you," right? So in that often repeated verse or phrase in the Quran where He says, He's the one who has made for you your hearing, your sight, and your minds. How little you are grateful. God isn't expecting you to sit there and say, "Oh Allah, thank you for my hearing," or "Allah, thank you for my sight," or "Allah, thank you for my." No, it means how little you use them, how little you use them as they should be used, right? In the Quran, shukr is action, right? Shukr, gratitude is action. I'malu ali Dawood shukra, right? Do, O family of Dawood, shukr, right? And the Quran says, "Hadaynahu sabila," that we gave guidance to the human being, imma shakiran wa imma kafura, either grateful or ungrateful, right? It's a path, right? We guided them to the two paths. These are the two paths, the paths of shukr and the paths of kufr. And just as the path of shukr is action, right? Actions that speak louder than words. You actually do shukr. You do shukr. In the same way, you do kufr, right? Kufr is mostly about your actions as well, right? That's how it comes down to. So it's safe to say that Jesus died in the Quran? Yes. Yes. I mean, I think it's pretty clear. If you just read the last, there's no second coming, if that's what you're talking about, right? If you read the ending of Surah 5, it's pretty clear that Isa is not coming back, and that what he references in the ending of that surah, فَلَمَّا تَوَفَّيْتَنِي, and when you caused me to die, obviously there, you are the one who was watching me. فَلَمَّا تَوَفَّيْتَنِي, the word used is wafa. That's the same word which is used in the verses about the crucifixion and all of that, right? بَلْ رَفَعَهُ اللَّهُ إِلَيْهِ, right? And then afterwards, Allah says, "Ya Isa ibn Maryam, inni mutawaffika," right? I am going to mutawaffika, wafa. I am going to cause you to die, right? So I think it's very clear that Isa did die. Of course, not on the cross, right? Not crucified, but afterwards, which is how the whole idea that he was resurrected probably came about, right? That it seemed to them that they'd killed him or crucified him, but they hadn't. And then later on, he was seen, and he was resurrected. No, he wasn't resurrected, but afterwards he did pass away. And I think he was actually bodily lifted. Like, we don't have his grave anywhere, right? Because even after that, we say, okay, then if he died after the resurrection, there should have been some trace or some story or something about where he died and is buried, right? But I think he was just lifted from the earth. But رفعه الله إليه, rather Allah lifted him up to himself, but that was part of his wafa. That was, he died. He's not up there still living somewhere, right? And will come back before Judgment Day and all that stuff. No, it doesn't imply that most people are doomed. It implies that a lot of mankind are ungrateful, right? That they're not practices then they're not grateful for a lot of the blessings that God sends, right? They're not grateful for the rains and the we don't see a lot of the stuff which comes to us from nature. We don't see it much, right? It just becomes part of our life, and we aren't very grateful for it, right? We aren't very grateful in terms of actually thinking in terms of gratitude, but also in actually doing, right? So we corrupt the rivers, we corrupt the oceans, we corrupt all of these things. That's part of kufr, is how we treat the natural world, which through it God has brought to us these bounties, right? These blessings, and how we return that back to the natural world, right? Are we returning it back? Are we engaging in shukr towards that, or kufr, right? In gratitude, again, in terms of actions, right? And we, right now, at least overwhelmingly, are engaged in kufr, right? And in gratitude to the natural world. We destroy it, we use it up, that sort of stuff. What is this? This is the diagnosis of one of the Muslim world's biggest causes behind extremism, sectarianism, and spiritual bankruptcy. There should be no such thing as full-time man or a religious scholar. Yeah, right? That there should be no such thing as a full-time man or religious scholar, of religion or scholar. Well, I mean, what the Quran talks about in terms of the job of the quote unquote scholar or faqih, right? So again, I have a sorry to keep on sort of self-quoting here, but I do have a stream about the faqih job, right? The job of the person who gains understanding of the deen. So there's a verse about that which says that it isn't for the faithful to all go out together, like in a battle, that from every division there should remain a few so that they would gain understanding of the religion. Why? Right? Why? It isn't so they can start giving fatwas. It isn't so they can start, telling them the halal and the haram and all of this. No. لِيُنذِرُوا قَوْمَهُمْ إِذَا رَجَعُوا, so that they may warn, right? That the job of the person who is a religious scholar or a person who understands the deen, right? There should be some people who, doesn't even have to be full-time, like you said, right? But there should be a certain section of people who will be warners, right? So the Quran talks about that in that kind of way, right? But yeah, I mean, a full-time scholars and these kind. I mean, the issue with a lot of the full-time scholars and what we have now in the Muslim world isn't that they're full-time. It's that a lot of them, of course, to become like a religious scholar in the Muslim world now, who becomes that, right? Who becomes that? The ones who become that are the ones who have the least grades in school, right? The ones who have the highest marks, the most intelligent kids, and these people, what do they all become, right? They become they become lawyers, doctors, engineers, to enter into the school of medicine or law or engineering, right? Law not so much in the Muslim world, right? Not many rights there, but engineering and pharmacology, pharmacy, medicine. The kids who enter these are the ones who have the high marks, right? The kids who get high marks, they get into there, right? To get into those subjects, you have to have high marks, right? So the most intelligent people are going into there, and we have the stupidest people the dropouts, the ones who may be bullies at school, the ones who are maybe who were lazy, thuggish. These are the people who are becoming who they don't get the high marks, and then they end up, what do they do? Oh, I'll study Sharia, right? And they end up becoming the mullahs and the sheikhs, right? So I think that's more of a problem than the issue of a full-time religious scholar. It's which category of people are becoming the religious scholars. All right, okay. So it's still nobody backstage. So I do want to close it up soon. So he's saying here, it mutates their worldview into a reductionist lens and disconnects them from real life. Yes, I agree with that. I mean, but again, it depends on who they are, right? There are some who are actually involved. There are religious scholars who are more like community people who are really involved in the community, right? At a community level, and they're engaged in good works, in soup kitchens, in food sharing, and solving problems. They have that, right? Then they live in the real world, not as much as in their sort of like ivory towers. But yeah, you do have that issue. But again, another one, finding the problems of the Muslim world is beyond me in a lot of ways. I mean, remember, we're here really just to contemplate the Quran, or share our contemplations of the Quran. We could end up speaking for hours about these sort of stuff. Okay, what understanding? See this one. What understanding do we have of jinns? All I know is they listen to the Quran recitation and have some sort of sense. Yeah, I mean, not much. I mean, we know that they're a species apart, right, from humankind. Well, of course, there are some people who say no, jinn means the hidden leaders, right? The Quran is talking about, really, when it says jinn, the hidden leaders. I'm not convinced by that. I think jinn are actually real entities, real spiritual, non-physical entities, right? Shaitan was of the jinn, right? And among the jinn, there's the righteous and the unrighteous. Okay, as the Quran says, they can't possess you, right? There's no possession, I don't think, where a jinn or something possesses you, and all that sort of stuff. Then that isn't, that doesn't happen. And generally, they sort of like just don't interact with our physical world, I suppose. Basic logic, I thought, was most people have kufr. People with kufr go to hell. Most people are going to hell. No, so when it comes to Judgment Day, right? Everybody will just be judged by this. It's very simple. Scales, right? The scales of good deeds, scales of bad deeds. I mean, we tend to think of it that way, though of course the Quran doesn't really mention scales of good deeds, scales of bad deeds. It talks about just one set of scales, really, right? Whoever's their scale of deeds is heavy is saved. Whoever's scale of deeds is light is damned. So it comes down to that, right? Another way to enter Jannah is very simple: is to just refrain from all of the major sins and wrong actions, right? So the Quran says that, right? That whoever abstains from all of the major sins and indecencies. What are the major sins and indecencies? Maybe that's something we need to do another time. But it's basically the ones for which hell is threatened in the Quran, right? So whenever you see in the Quran some action for which hellfire is threatened for it, right? Or that there's actual worldly punishment for it, that's one of the major sins, right? Those are the major sins. The things for which there is no huge threat in the Quran for it, it's not a major sin, right? So to stay away, if you stay away from all of the major sins and indecencies, the Quran says Allah will forgive you all of your faults and admit you into Jannah, right? So stay away from the big sins. For example, consuming the wealth of an orphan is a major sin, right? Testifying falsely, right, in like a court of law to give false testimony is a major sin. Zina is a major sin. Murder is a major sin, right? These are the major sins. Things like this, right? Most of the things which people know, right? They already know them, right? Theft, right, is also a major sin. What the Quran calls hiraba, right? That war, starting making war on people. These are the major sins, right? The things where, as you read the Quran, I need to do it myself and sort of like list them out. But the things which the Quran threatens hellfire for, right? The things for which the Quran there's a threat of hellfire for it, a threat of punishment for it. Slandering women as well, slandering married women, that they've committed zina. That's also a major sin. So these are the ones, right? Like the 10 commandments, right? Well, I think about it, if you understand. So he's asking what if people disagree on the major sins like interest, and I think if you understand what the Quran means by these things, nobody will disagree on it. So, for example, zina, right? A lot of people think zina is just any sexual relations outside of marriage. That isn't zina. Zina is when there's a married woman involved, right? When there's a married woman involved. When a married woman involved, whether the man himself is married or unmarried, they are both considered zani, right? They've committed zina, right? If the woman is not married, it's not zina, okay? It's something else in the Quran, right? If they are both unmarried, again, it's not zina, right? Zina is when there's a married woman involved, okay? So an unmarried woman can never commit zina, right? An unmarried woman can never commit zina, right? And a married woman, right, who has any relation with somebody who isn't her husband, that's always zina, right? And a man, whether he's married or unmarried, it doesn't matter. It's the woman who he's with. If she is married, then it's zina. If she's unmarried, then it's not zina, right? And I don't think anybody will disagree that is a major sin, right? That would be a major sin to sort of basically, of course, because the issue, of course, the reason why there's that division is because biology, right? It's from the woman that a child will come, right? Child who will be the sibling of siblings already there, the grandchild of the parents, right? The niece, the nephew, right? There's the issues of inheritance, there's all of this stuff, right? And that all comes down to who the father is, because the mother is always known. The mother of the child is always going to be known. So what's slandering people? It depends on the slander, right? So, like we said, the slander of zina, right, is a major sin, right? Because it's punishment is threatened for it in the Quran, right? But other things, no, they're still sins, and they just slander on some other thing. They'll be part of what will be weighed on the day of judgment, right, against you. But if you stay away from the major sins, then the minor sins will be forgiven, right? Yeah, false testimony. False testimony is a major sin. All right, okay. I think she'll wrap it up there, and inshallah, I hope it gave you some food for thought, especially the idea. I mean, I don't think many people are speaking about it much, but I think it's something that could be on the horizon as academia picks up more and more steam. We really do have to be careful that we don't replace traditional tafsir with academia in terms of allowing it to be a barrier between us and the guidance of the Quran, right? You don't have to wait on academia in order to contemplate or take guidance from the Quran, right? That's one thing which I think might be something coming up on the horizon. I've been reading the Quran more and I can see it's more about actions rather than belief, but some of these verses were unclear. Yes, no problem. I know. It's because our minds snap back a lot to what we are used to. I would like to see maybe a translation of the Quran done, which will keep some of the key words of the Quran in their in a sort of transliteration form, right? So kufur kept as kufur, right? Shirk kept as shirk, right? Keeping it that way, I think, will help to clear up a lot of things. If that could be done, if a translation of Quran could be done in that kind of way, where it's kept clear. You keep the key terms of the Quran in the thing. Taqwa kept as taqwa, not sometimes righteousness, sometimes piety, sometimes fear of Allah, right? Because I can see that when somebody's reading in the English, right, you're not going to see, it's not going to all link together if the same word is not appearing in the same way throughout, right? If every time taqwa is when you see righteousness in English, and you won't know in Arabic if the original is bir, or if it's taqwa, or if it's salah, right? These three things are just sort of like jumbled up in the English, right? There's no continuity between it, in the translation, so you can actually see that is what's being referenced over and over again. So that might be an interesting thing, right? Having a translation of the Quran which keeps, the big five sort of vocabulary words, right, in the Quran: kufr, shirk, nifaq, taqwa. What was the other one that I always used to put on there, right? But there's some like that. So the key words, right? All right, Hector, thank you. It was very interesting. I have to study now. All right, good. Okay, get back to those studies. All right, okay. Thank you. Those 607 for all your questions, and Ali as well. And yes, Iron Man. Good to see you still here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, everybody, and until next time.